Welcome to the church library. Draw up a chair and join us as we sort through these stacks of old books. I'm Marissa Burt.
And I'm Kelsey McGinnis. And here in the church library, we host conversations about popular Christian books. This season, we are dusting off Christian parenting resources.
Our book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families, examines many of these books, the obscure, the bestsellers, the ones that still pop up in church parenting classes.
Let's see what's on the bookshelves today.
Hi, Marissa.
Hi, Kelsey. Good to see you,
Friday.
as always.
Good to see you, too. We're recording on a Friday today. So
That's right. Happy Friday back at you.
Yeah, it is the second day of the Iowa State Fair.
Ooh, fun times.
So that means that summer really is coming to a close. There's I don't know if this is actually still like a law on the books, but it's sort of like in Iowa, school can't start until the end of the Iowa State Fair is like the long-standing Iowa tradition. Yeah. This after next week, the fair is done, and then it's like officially back to school fall stuff.
That's so fun. Are you guys going to go to the fair?
So my husband is there today doing, my husband's a photojournalist. I don't know if I've talked about that on here before, but he is, there's a political there are always politicians at the fair. It's like a very, typical stop for campaigning politicians. So there's someone there today that he's taking pictures of. I don't know if we will go. It's very hot today. Next week isn't supposed to be quite as hot. So TBD. There are some people who are like fair people who go every day and they like camp and do all kinds of stuff.
Wow. It's a whole thing.
We are not fair people like that, but it is actually really fun if you know where to go find stuff. And we have some friends who do 4-H, which is like a farming. I don't even know what 4-H stands for, but they like show chickens and do like the agricultural culture competitions and stuff. It's very, very sweet. So,
I love it.
Yeah, we may go. Is the State Fair a thing in Washington?
We do. We have one. Not in the same way. I don't think when we lived in South Carolina, I went every year and I loved it. I actually entered a little quilt one year and I thought that was fun.
Do you still quilt? I did not know this about you.
I mean, that makes it sound, I like the idea of quilting. I've done a few quilts, but I'm not, quilting takes a sense of artistry funny quilting story. So the one year I was like, I'm going to do a quilt, like my own pattern of quilt. And it was primarily motivated by this beautiful fabric store we had in the town we were living in. And I went there and I just shopped, and it was going to be this quilt it was for Easter Vigil. So it was tied into creation, the 7 days of creation. So I was trying to do all these things. So I got all these cool fabrics. And then I brought them home and I realized there's really a skill to artistically laying out the colors and fabrics, and it doesn't just magically come together. And it was like so much clashing, and so it was really bad. So I went back and I got a preset pack of coordinated colors, and I made it, and it's beautiful and I love it. And then those fabrics just became my fabric bin, and I've done a number of different projects. So when I say quilting, yes, I like it. I like the kind of therapeutic nature of doing handwork and sewing and stuff, but I am not a quilter.
Well, I'm impressed. You sound like a quilter to me. I don't sew at all, so that's impressive to me.
Yeah, or disastrous, one or the other. Have you ever entered anything in the fair?
No, I have not. I think my husband had some photographs displayed there a couple of years ago. They do like galleries and stuff.
That's cool.
Did that, but I've never done anything like that before. I just like to go and look. So
it's so fun. Out here, it's just really expensive at this point. Is it like that here it's just kind of a racket.
To go to the fair is very expensive?
To go and then to do things like the rides and the games and the things. It's you have to put it in your annual family budget.
Yes. If you're going to go for a day and park and eat things, For some people, it really is like a final end of the year, like vacation. It is crazy expensive, so silly. But if you love it, I think people decide it's
really fun and fun memories. So I think ours is much Ours is later. It's September, October or something, I think. So.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, fun. End of summer. End of podcast. Here we are, season 1.
Yes. Yeah. For listeners, just sort of the backstory of this is that we decided to do a limited podcast as we were done with writing the book and getting ready to really promote the book, and had a lot of things that we still felt like we could talk about and didn't have anywhere to put them. And so we put them here. So thank you for joining us. Yeah, this is our appendix. Right. We would have loved to put like 5 appendices in the book, but apparently word count includes appendices, we have learned. So they are here, and thank you for listening, those of you who have. It's been really fun getting mail from people and questions and feedback, and I'm just amazed that people are here listening. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. It's been great, and maybe inspired us to do other seasons on different topics.
Right.
We'll see.
Yes. Evangelicals are people of books, and there's a lot in church libraries to talk about. And so there is likely a season 2 coming. But this last episode, we wanted to answer some questions that came in on social media or via Buzzsprout as fan mail, and also just do some like final housekeeping-y things about the book. So for those of you wondering, or maybe have not listened from the beginning, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting comes out on October 14th from Brazos Press. You can pre-order it now. You can pre-order it directly from the Baker Brazos website, which we will put in the show notes. You can also order it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble or anywhere else. It's actually good for us to have people ordering from different places, because if you order from like Amazon, for example, you can leave a review as a verified purchaser, which is valuable to us, as other writers know. What other housekeeping things about the book?
Yeah, that is a great thing to do. I think Baker still has that 40% off. So if you want a good deal, that is a great way. And they guarantee release day shipping. Amazon also guarantees it, but in the past we've heard from other authors and seen ourselves, sometimes that doesn't necessarily pan out. So that's a good way to go. If you don't have room in your budget for books, which I totally get. I have an endless book list of wish list. You can request it in at your local library, and that's a big help for authors as well. You can just fill out a book request form or talk to them, and that can be great because they'll get it in circulation there. Also, I'm recording the audiobook version next week. I'm super excited about that.
I cannot wait to hear about the process of that.
So it'll be available on Audible if you prefer audiobook form, and it'll also be available ebook. So all of those ways are a great way to pre-order. End of August, we'll have some pre-order bonuses for you, and that includes if you've already pre-ordered, you can let us know and we can make sure you get the bonuses at that point. And then launch team signups in September. So you can follow us on social media to stay up to speed with all of that, or you can sign up for our email newsletter. We will be sending one out once a month from here on out with kind of a hub of all this kind of information. So if that's an easy way for you to stay connected with us, so you make sure. I'm really excited about the launch team. And if you've never been on a book launch team, I think it's pretty fun.
Yeah. You have been on more of them than I have. Can you talk a little bit about what that entails?
Yes. So ours is going to be on Facebook. They're typically on Facebook just because that's a convenient way to do group communication. And Caitlin is the name of our launch team manager. She will be running the launch with really kind of plug and play prompts for you. So you'll get an early e-copy of the book if you've pre-ordered, and you can read it ahead of time, hopefully, before you're sharing your thoughts. And then she will give you a little prompt each week or each day. There will be different things like post one of these social media graphics, or like it on Goodreads or leave a review, like bite-sized things you can do. And I like the plug and play aspect as a participant because it can feel manageable. You're not having to create a lot of content or reinvent the wheel, but just little prompts. And then there are fun giveaways, which we got to pick out, you guys, which is really fun.
Yes.
For everyone who left a Goodreads review, they'll pick a name and someone will win a little prize. And then we also will do probably a couple of lives over there. So we'll have just some fun personal interaction with you all. And I don't know what else they might have in store, but that's kind of been the vibe of what we've done before. And it's really, I don't know, I think it's a little bonding because everyone's working together, and certainly authors appreciate, it's huge for authors. But as a participant, I've liked it because you feel like you're part of this group that's maybe talking about it. It's a little bit like a mini book club because you're all kind of talking about it together in real time. So that's fun too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So fun. So we're really looking forward to that. That feels like it is coming up quickly.
Good to be here soon.
Stay tuned. Instagram is where you will probably most quickly, but we're also on Threads and Twitter, and I'm less and less on Twitter these days, but you can find this information.
Yeah,
everywhere.
Find us anywhere you can find us. We always have those linked in the show notes. One other housekeeping item. Last week we talked about doing an interview with theologian Andrew Remington Riera about theologies of atonement and how that shows up in Christian parenting resources. We had to bump our recording back. So that will show up as a bonus episode, maybe like late August, early September. So this will actually be our final episode for season 1, our Q&A episode. And then later on, you can come back for one last little tidbit about Christian parenting resources.
Yes. And we'll probably remind about launch team and pre-orders and stuff in that one as well. So you'll hear some of this again if you listen. But that will be, I'm really excited for that conversation because
I'm really looking forward to it too.
His work really helps illuminate some of these really deep theological questions about how beliefs about atonement have bled into Christian parenting over the years in ways that like I hear slip into conversation with other Christian parents. And it catches, now I always notice it because of the work we've done. But I think a lot of folks don't even recognize that what they're doing is sort of doing a weird translation and mixing of beliefs about atonement in with how they think about how they deal with their children.
Yeah, it's a good way
in
of
ways
putting it.
That we don't, there is no reason to necessarily. It's become this really effective way of talking about Christian parenting. But it has some really, I think, kind of alarming implications. And we see them in these books all the time. So I'm so excited to listen to your conversation with Andrew. I think it will be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So we are going to answer outstanding questions here. One of the questions kind of relates to that conversation you're going to have, so we will probably make that a shorter one. But the first question we wanted to talk about was sort of a process question that I think is really helpful. And it's one that we had also addressed in the introduction of the book because we want to be transparent about what our book does do and what it doesn't do. So this person asks, could you give a fuller description of the personal survey process you used for your book, how you found people to survey, how many participated, what type of study it was, will it be peer reviewed, and what types of questions did you ask? So I can start by saying when we first started this book project, I am coming from academia where like an IRB, institutional review board, peer review would be part of any kind of sociological study that you would do. Our book is a trade book. It is not an academic book. And neither of us are sociologists, and neither of us are child development specialists. And so we don't want to oversell the study. I would not even call it a study. So as a journalist, as someone who works in journalism world, I would say what we did is a lot of interviewing and reporting. We did do a survey to gather stories from people who self-selected in. We did try to go out and look for people who weren't finding us automatically, but this really was a story gathering process more than a quantitative survey with a with a carefully constructed sample size. That is not the kind of survey that we did.
Yes. And I still hope someone does a survey like that. I would love that. Like originally I was like, wouldn't that be amazing? And I'm so thankful to be working with a co-author who was like, that would be amazing and impossible for us to do.
Right. At least right now, that's the sort of thing that like I would love to be part of a research team that really does that work. But there are a number of reasons why we've talked about before why it is very difficult to gather good data on parenting practices. Because it has to be self-reported. So there is research out there about outcomes that are very granular, kind of tracking correlation of certain parenting practices with or certain norms in religious households around parenting. Those resources, those studies do exist, and you can find them. Maybe at some point we should put together like a bibliography of some of those. But a lot of that work has been attempted. Our method is much more qualitative, though. It's very similar to what I would do for an article for Christianity Today, where you do interviews and you tell those stories and you place them in the context of a bigger story. And that's really what our book does. And you'll see I forget which, it's one of the last couple of chapters, we do put in there kind of without a whole lot of commentary from us, just some of the stories as written or told to us in that chapter, so people can just kind of tell their experiences with these resources. So I do think it's important for us to acknowledge that these are people who are self-selecting into this process, right? Like people who have a story to tell based on their experiences with Christian parenting literature. Most of those people are going to have some criticism of this. We try to be as upfront about that as possible and acknowledge that there are plenty of people who grew up in households where Dobson's books or Ted Tripp's books were the standard, who do not feel that they were particularly harmed by these practices. Those people absolutely exist, and their experiences are valid. And none of what we're trying to say is that those experiences are less valid than the stories we're telling. But it does matter a great deal that a lot of these resources are connected to abuse, estrangement, harm, and beliefs that have the potential to produce really negative outcomes for individuals, families, and communities.
Yes, that is all so well said and important, and speaks to how carefully we try and talk about this as surveys and interviews rather than research. And as coming from a novelist angle, I think of it as the show, not tell. Like these stories really show how this showed up in different families' experiences. The people who are saying, this is what it looked like to live in a home where parents were quoting these resources or utilizing these principles. And that's not to say it's how it looked like in every home, but I think it really enables readers to have a powerful sense of what does it look like to apply this because we are really looking at the primary sources of the resources. This is what people are saying and doing, and we're analyzing that and with a critical lens to think critically about it. So that's an important thing to think about. And maybe someone will define a scope, do some peer-reviewed research, do some quantitative studies, but those require a lot of narrow defining of terms and narrow definitions. And we also wanted to give a broad bird's eye view of things as well, and to kind of pull out some common threads. So more a big picture idea that is a little bit at odds with the kind of claims quantitative research can make. So that didn't necessarily fit with kind of the thesis of the book either.
Right. And I do think it's important also to say that our book is looking and delving most deeply into existing books. We're not necessarily doing psychological analysis.
Right.
We're not necessarily trying to make claims about general outcomes. We're looking at the claims these books are making in particular. That's probably like the most important aspect of this book. And then I think looking at the claims and then looking at these stories is very, very enlightening. So I'm hoping that is helpful for people as they read. I also want to note there is a resource. It's an academic book that I think is really enlightening reading. If this is something that interests you, it's called Practicing What the Doctor Preached. It's by Susan Ridgely. And it is a book about the families who read James Dobson and were kind of focused on the family disciples. She really does like the granular ethnographic work of going and widely interviewing a whole bunch of people. And her work shows how people adapted those teachings for their specific circumstances. And it does a really great job of showing how you get a range of experiences in these families. I think that is really valuable. And I think it's really valuable, especially if you're someone who's kind of skeptical of our project, saying like, well, wait a second. I feel like I've seen good outcomes from these resources. I think that book in particular is really, really helpful because you kind of see people in real time explaining to a researcher how they kind of made peace with using a resource from a person who they deeply disagreed with about corporal punishment or homosexuality. Like there are people who were willing to like use dare to discipline, even though they thought that Dobson was sort of bigoted in certain ways. Like it's really, really fascinating. And I think it's kind of like a touch grass kind of book because it's just so from the ground level.
Right.
And that's the kind of research that I think helps.
Well, and that's so important because we're often saying, it's really difficult to say every individual's within the same family are going to have an individual experience and families are going to have unique experiences. So threads can be identified, kind of like observations can be made, but as far as how someone experienced this is going to be mitigated or exacerbated in a number of different ways. So yeah, that's important. We did originally want to include our survey questions. We did an initial general survey and then we did a more detailed follow-up interview, more style detailed survey questions. And then we interviewed some of the survey respondents. So it was kind of like a 3-stage process. And we initially wanted to include some of those questions as an appendix. But again, we ran out of word count for that. But if that's something of interest to you, you can reach out to us and we can offer more clarity around that process if you like.
Quite open-ended. It was really sort of what books were present in your household, what memories do you have of what discipline looked like, things that were sort of inviting people to just
reflect. We didn't want to try and lead in different ways. So more. Speak to whatever aspect of this you would like to speak to. Anything you would like us to know about your experience, kind of questions.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
Okay, next question. In a similar vein, someone asks, on a theological denominational spectrum, where do most of the parenting resources you researched fall? Additionally, where would you place your own book on this spectrum? What particular framework informs your views on spiritual formation and parenting, and has it evolved over time? What biases did you bring to researching and writing your book? Thank you in advance. There are multiple questions wrapped up in that one. It's a great question.
Yeah. I think to that first question, what denomination? So I mean, I would put these books in evangelicalism broadly, but that's not a denomination, right? It's sort of a Christian subculture of the U.S. And I would say particular to the U.S. Like, I mean, the global evangelicalism is different than American evangelicalism. And these books are, for the most part, very part of the American evangelical subculture and not necessarily a denomination. A lot of these authors come from, like, Dobson was originally, the child of Nazarene parents. Ted Tripp is,
I think, Presbyterian.
Reformed Presbyterian. Paul David Tripp, I think, also. I'm trying to, I don't even know.
Michael Pearl's an Arminian.
You cannot put these resources into denominational categories neatly, because they were uniquely ecumenical, and that's part of what made them successful. I mean, Focus on the Family was this incredibly ecumenical enterprise. You have Catholic families using it, you have Orthodox families using it. You have, I mean, its reach was huge, and that was part of its strength and marketability, was that Dobson really, because we're talking about family life teaching, people weren't going to him for necessarily questions about even things like child baptism, right? Like, this is like child rearing tips kind of thing. And those kinds of questions, I think people are willing to accept answers from someone who may disagree with things even like communion practices or the Eucharist. It's like there is cohort of parenting teachers that are sort of willing to I don't know, not sidestep, but they're just not speaking into those real denomination-specific questions.
Yeah, I would say you can think of it in some ways as non-denominational in that it would appeal in the way kind of topical sermons will or topical resources will to evangelicals broadly. I do think there are some corners of the parenting library shelves that have some denominational distinctives. When you get into resources that move beyond parenting tips or behavioral tips, like Dobson's offering, into theological catechesis, you see more Reformed flavors. You see that show up a lot more, I would say, probably in dominant ways. And that's probably due to theological reasons of the Reformed tradition. You also see a big influence of, this isn't a denomination, but of the nouthetic viewpoint. The Bible is the instruction manual, and inerrancy. So kind of these tenets of American evangelicalism show up in distinct ways in these resources. So I would say, there's a whole corner that's very Reformed, and there are Reformed communities, I think, are highly drawn to family life teaching in specific ways.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, so that would be that. Our own book, I don't know if I think we can speak to our personal biases, but I don't think, because we're really aiming for observational reflection, we are not trying to write with a theological lens. So for instance, even when we're talking about doctrines of atonement, how they show up in Christian parenting in the chapter on sin, we're not trying to make a case for a specific perspective on the atonement, more to say, here's how it shows up, or here's a historical kind of view of different theories of the atonement. And here's what we see showing up in Christian parenting teaching, how it develops historically, and to sort of raise questions about that, rather than to say, here's the framework you should use.
Yes.
And so in a number of different ways. That being said, we as authors, of course, have our own perspectives that we bring to this work that is going to have inevitable bias, though I do think we're intentionally trying throughout to distance ourselves. It's why there's not element of memoir. It's why we're very careful not to speak to our own experience as parents or adult children. We really are trying to be reporters on this and to draw connections in a way that hopefully keeps the work accessible for others and whatever background or bias they are coming from.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I absolutely tried to not let my personal view of my own parenting practices come too much into this, besides to sort of, I think at a couple points in the book, I do say, having had some experiences of feeling out of control, like what that sort of like caused me to notice in what I believed about parenting. Because I think, like a lot of people reading this book, I grew up very steeped in the teachings in these resources. And so part of the process of writing this book was sort of coming to terms with the ways that the ideas in them were informing how I saw myself as a parent. And that's been an ongoing thing. My children are still very young. I have a 3, 5, and 7-year-old. So my approach and beliefs about parenting they're changing all the time because my kids are changing all the time. And I think, working on this book, just sort of drove home for me how much that's just going to continue to happen, and how few easy answers there are about it. I think if anything, I came out of this book just more convinced that it's my relationship with my children. A lot about it is just not very generalizable. There's some like helpful stuff out there, but it's a lot of it is just like the actual work of being in a relationship with these younger people.
Yeah. Oh, that's well said. Yeah. And I think if you find us on social media, we maybe are referencing a little bit more. You may see more of our personal views or biases or different things. I think we feel a little bit more free in those conversations or discussions, or even here on the podcast. But certainly in our writing, we really took seriously the goal of trying to remove ourselves as key players in this story. I come from, my bias, I suppose, is I come from an Anglican tradition. I'm a pastor's wife in the Anglican tradition for over 2 decades now. That's been formed me spiritually, but it is a notoriously ecumenical tradition. It's I think the largest expression of the Christian faith globally that is ecumenical, that would say there are other perspectives that are worth listening to within the Christian realm of orthodoxy. So I bring that to this work intentionally as well, to sort of say, yes, I don't know, that's a long practiced piece of my Christianity that would say, yes, I have personal beliefs that I hold and have thought through, and also I do not envision myself as having the correct specific framework that needs to be applied across the board. So that feels like a really natural place to consider these ideas from.
Yeah. And I forget the last part. Well, I can sort of, I'm sure I've said this here before, but I'm sort of a evangelical.
What particular framework informs your views on spiritual formation and parenting? Has it evolved over time, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I sort of like my own spiritual background. I'm sort of like what I would call maybe an evangelical mutt of sorts, because it's my family was, I was a Campus Crusade for Christ missionary kid, stateside in the U.S. for a long time. I've been in SBC churches, have been in Evangelical Free Church of America, been in Reformed and non-denominational. So I have kind of over the course of my life been in all those different circles. And similar to you, though, Marissa, I feel like my posture toward denomination is kind of a loosely held one because of that, where I have no real animosity toward any of them, and I'm thankful for certain things I learned from each one. And I'm sure, different ones have formed me in different ways that I'm still unpacking, but I try not to unpack them in the book, and try to take. I will say I have spent enough time in these circles that I feel like I've known people of goodwill in all of them, and I think one thing we try to do in our book is to try to be as generous with some of these authors as we can, to say, like, it is possible to hold some of these beliefs in good faith. And if we take them at their word and treat these words generously, here is where you get, as opposed to kind of trying to attack their biography or something like that. I think having spent time in a lot of these evangelical spaces, having parents who are probably more conservative than I am still, I do think that has helped me be generous with the people we're writing about. Probably not always. I certainly do not do that perfectly, but I do think that helps.
I think so too, and it's impossible to evaluate the motives of a lot of the people we're writing about, and we try not to do that because it's easy to fall into chronological snobbery and villainize and make cardboard cutouts of people. And I think as we write in the book, it's much more complex than that. Like that impulse maybe has more in line with the kind of fundamentalist either or thinking. I think it's possible that multiple things are true, that some of these authors meant well, some of the teaching has kernels of truth, some families had good experience with it, and others experienced egregious abuse, and financial considerations were wrapped up in this, and motivations about celebrity and power. And so I think it's complicated. So we try not to make claims about those sort of things as much as say, well, what were people saying? And let's trace the through lines here. And how did people describe this impacting them? Rather than to say, here's what we think Dobson was really trying to do, or here's what we think Ted Tripp really meant to do, because we don't really know. Sometimes they said really clearly what they were trying to do. Right. Dobson in particular, but other times not so much. So similarly with theological frameworks, sometimes and this kind of leads back to that first question, sometimes we can identify elements from frameworks pretty clearly, but a lot of it got mushed together. There's a place where you have, someone like Larry Tomczak writing as a 20-something-year-old father of a toddler, and he's pulling in theological ideas, but are these fully formed? Not really. They're kind of whatever his rudimentary theological ideas at that point in his life are, and then they get memorialized in this like immortal way because these resources regurgitate. So we can talk about theological frameworks, but sometimes it's just like, again, it's the myth. That's why that terminology is really helpful. I think there's a very there's an element of illusion wrapped up in all of this that makes it very slippery to try and talk about in crisp, clear terms that maybe we would like to be able to say, oh, well, it's all this theological category, or it's all this framework, but there's a lot of blurring of the lines and kind of recycling of ideas that then put it in its own category.
Yep. Yeah.
I hope that answers that question. There was a lot packed into that, but if you'd like further conversation, you can always feel free to reach out to us too, please. Okay, we had some other ones. One of them we will just address really briefly because we have the podcast episode coming up with Andrew, and they kind of touched on that. Someone says, I'm curious about the parallels between complementarianism and the heretical belief in the eternal subordination of the Son, and authoritarian parenting practices and penal substitutionary atonement. In your experience, do the two simply go hand in hand, or is there a causal relationship? And I kind of I think I'm understanding this question to mean they're suggesting that in the same way, this theological idea about eternal subordination of the Son is really underlying complementarianism. Penal substitutionary atonement is really underlying authoritarian parenting practices. I don't think they're asking us to address complementarianism in particular. So I'm going to assume that and say, yes, we will be talking a lot with Andrew about this. I have a number of questions for him on this because he addresses this in his book, Lamb of the Free, at length, and that is his academic area of study and interest. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from him on this. The short version is, yes, I think there's a hand-in-hand, yes to both. I think there's a hand-in-hand relationship and a causal relationship there. There's a strong connection there.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that. I can't wait for that conversation. The chapters on sin and corporal punishment in our book, also, you do a great job of kind of unpacking some of those big ideas for people in, I think, a really readable way. So I'm excited for that to be out there for people to read as well.
Yes, I know. It's when we say we had to edit the word count, wow, did we? Because whole books could be written about each of these topics, right? Yes. But hopefully it will be accessible and in a meaningful way. Yes. Yeah. Okay, on a different note, someone asks, we have two more questions here. This one is, how has the research, writing, podcasting affected y'all's own parenting?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, there have been moments where I have just wanted to gather up all my children and hug them, because, we're both mothers. So there's a very real way. And when you're reading a lot of this, particularly the really harmful, problematic elements, or reading stories from people who lived just nightmare scenarios or heartbreaking scenarios, or parents writing of their regrets. And you weep and lament alongside as a fellow mother as well. And so certainly there were moments when I just wanted to draw them all close and be especially tender with them, because it reading some of these stories was such a powerful reminder of the vulnerability of childhood. And while I don't envision myself replicating these parenting methodologies, there are still ways where I am a parent who has so much power in the life of these vulnerable children. And so I felt a lot of tenderness during the writing process of this book, and the listening to people's stories.
Yeah. Similarly, I felt similarly. I will also add that I think one thing that struck me reading these books, and then also reading through the responses and listening to people tell their stories, I think I developed a greater appreciation for the relationship building with each child in their own unique way, according to their own unique personality. I think so much of the draw toward resources like this is looking for formulas that work, for blueprints that work, for scripts that work, which I understand. I think there's so many books out there outside of Christian parenting that offer scripts for hard situations, de-escalating tantrums, all those things. Like I understand the draw to those. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but I do think at some point what it starts to do is give parents ways to just sidestep relationships with their kids, to sidestep just sort of genuine connection, because it's almost as if some of these resources tell you that's not possible, or it doesn't matter. Like your children are kind of this other category of human, and that like a real relationship with them is either impossible or not important. And I think that leads to some real harm later. I think when we talk about estrangement and when parents kind of emotionally distance themselves from their children in order to do things like spank or discipline in authoritarian ways, you kind of have to dehumanize your children a little bit. And I think it's given me a lot more pause anytime I feel like I'm looking for some kind of a tool or a script or something that I feel like is giving me an out in a moment where I'm having a hard time connecting with my child, because it's just hard. It's harder. Like their brains do work differently than ours, but they are still full human beings, and it is difficult work, but I think it is. I feel more and more called to pay attention.
I love that. Yeah. I resonate with that too. Like, I think it has made me even more curious about child development and more interested to hear from people who speak to that. Yeah. And to realize there's more to learn there. I think too, this isn't necessarily how it's changed. I guess it's how it's changed my parenting, but more just my way of being in the world. I think it has, in some ways, cultivated a more, and this is such a, it shouldn't be a controversial word, but empathetic person. It has cultivated a kind of empathy, because I think so many of the stories we heard and the things we're discussing come in the formative years of childhood. And I think it reminded me of how we all were once children and had these incredibly formative memories that is at odds with kind of the Christian compulsion, I think, sometimes to have everything be very tidy and everyone to be super well behaved and just get it together. And so I think it really cracked my heart open in significant ways to think of us all as bearing the stories of childhood that put each of us on different paths with different I don't know, this isn't the right word, but advantages and disadvantages maybe, or just different skill sets and different ways we were formed. And I think pastorally speaking, from a perspective of someone in a Christian community that is tending people, like in parish ministry, that has been really meaningful for me to recognize that everyone comes with their own tender story, that the Lord, as the judge of all the earth, is able to perceive rightly, but I am not. And thankfully, that's not my job. Like, my job is to love. That is the direct job I'm given as a Christian. And I think that was helpful. There's this often has come to mind during the writing of this process. There's this old movie. Did you ever see The Inn of the Sixth Happiness ages ago?
No.
It's a black and white film. It's about the missionary Gladys Allward. I have no idea if it's aged well. It may not. It's from that era where you're like, it could be a film that is aged very badly. I don't know. But there's a line in it that stuck with me. And it talks about her because she is this kind of missionary to China, and she ends up taking care of children who need care. And one of the adults in the community where she's at kind of identifies her by that as how she encounters everyone. And this is the quote that comes to mind. She walks through a world full of evil and sees only children, and not complicated or cruel, just untidy ones who need to be washed and fed and loved. And for me, that encapsulates a little bit of this idea that we all are still these untidy children in need of washing and nourishment and love. And the way that humanizes us all, I think, a little bit to say, yeah, that's a piece of who we are. And that's a piece of how people are described in the Christian story, as well as children of God, in need of his care and his nurture and his tending. And that can be so fraught for so many of us because it's come with all of this toxic teaching and harmful teaching. But I still find that a really powerful thing to reflect on. So it's formed me in surprising ways in that sense, where I've been like, oh, this has changed the way I think about the human experience and the way I interact with other people, just generally speaking, not even necessarily in my own family, but.
Yeah, I love all of that. It's, I think, been thought-provoking and convicting, and it does just cause you to look at other families with more empathy, for sure, for me as well. Yeah, I definitely relate to that.
Yeah. I will say, we've been working on this for 2 years now. I am ready to put aside being in the headspace of reading these resources a lot. And I'm sure we still will keep tabs on it. But I know for me personally, there's a weightiness to this that, man, it's a lot to be reading and consuming and thinking about. So it will be nice to dip out of that and
oh my gosh, yes.
not be thinking.
Yeah, I do not want to be seeing this stuff on my feed anymore. I'm ready to do a feed cleanse and not see any more parenting reasons. The one more thing I would add is that it also has really, I think, lessened my I guess respect. That's the way. It's too harsh. It has changed the way I look at parenting resources.
100%.
I just think that most of them are not all that useful. And it people ask for recommendations. I just want to say, there's some to absolutely avoid, but a lot of it is just if you find it helpful, I guess fine. You probably find it helpful because it resonates with your personality and the personality of your kids. I don't think that necessarily makes it a great resource, but if it is helpful to you, then fine. But I think I find myself wanting to caution people to just hold these resources with so much distance. Take something, leave something, whatever, and because they change all the time. It's profitable because the pendulum swings back and forth. It always will. We're watching it happen right now.
Yes.
And I just, I would encourage people to not subscribe to any one particular method, person, methodology, anything for any other reason than oh, this is helpful for me at this moment. And then just, keep that
keep it
like
there,
critical
like,
distance. Yeah.
Yes, this is like a friend who gave me some friendly advice. The end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And some of this, I'm parenting over 2 generations of kids. It's funny. I've got 3 who are Gen Z, 3 who are Gen Alpha. So at this point, I'm a little too tired to read parenting resources, honestly, and have seen them come and go so much just personally on my shelves, but also very much the same. Feel kind of like I am curious to learn more about things like child development, human development, communication. Like, generally speaking, I am less interested in parenting specific advice, more, if that makes sense. Yeah. And in the same way that, I don't know, at a certain point, I cleared all the marriage books off my bookshelves. Like, I've got my Christian parenting resource library that when the book is out, when we're done with the podcast, I will box those gems up and will not have any of those on my shelves anymore. But yeah,
absolutely.
Right, what about our last question?
Last question. Okay, this is a good one. Let's see. It says, you all have touched on how corporal punishment can easily cross the line into physical abuse. I'm wondering if you could also talk about how, or if some of these resources also seem to set parents up to fall into spiritual or emotional abuse. Mm-hmm. Some of these resources seem to me at best manipulative. I'm thinking of shepherding a child's heart, especially, and the general notion that most child behavior is sin and absolutely must be pointed out to the child. This is getting into a question of spiritual and emotional abuse, which I feel like anything we say to that needs to be prefaced with neither of us are counselors, mental health professionals. I have no sort of pastoral care experience. So I try to be careful in calling something spiritual or emotional abuse, not because I don't think those things are absolutely real and happening here, but because I am not necessarily qualified to speak to what those look like, how to identify trauma, those kinds of things. So I want to be careful about that. But yes, I think we can both say with confidence, yes, a lot of these resources, especially the ones that really follow the nouthetic model of counseling, very easily end up placing a parent in this role of spiritual manipulator, interpreter, soothsayer of sorts over their child in ways that I think can be really destructive.
Yeah. And I think so deceptive because a parent thinks, oh, I'm doing it. I'm doing the right thing as a Christian parent. And meanwhile, they are engulfing their child or creating these enmeshed relationships or attempting to speak for their child or assigning motivations to their child or any number of things. And yeah, I appreciate your disclaimer at the front end because we hope that our work will be a help to professionals in those fields who are trained and equipped to work with clients to help identify spiritual and emotional abuse and things of that nature, because there are some distinctives about really in the weeds about evangelical parenting resources that I think if it's not your subculture, it's important context to help those professionals do that work, because often I will say there are ways these teachings enabled or groomed for abuse. And so I think you can look at the teachings themselves to be like, oh yeah, this normalizes someone saying the people who love me will cause me pain. Yep. Or it's okay for someone to name my motivations for me, or it's okay for someone to shame me or manipulate me into behavior. Like these are all clear in the prescriptive teaching, but how that unfolds, I think, needs, again, a personal experience and some of the professional insight from those fields, or the trained, the qualified insight from those fields. But I would say, generally speaking, the threads that seem to show up are in those realms of overstepping, like the lack of a concept of boundaries, of functional boundaries, the lack of agency, the spiritually authoritative teaching that kind of like speaks comprehensively for someone's spiritual experience, to speak with godlike authority. Downstream of those ideas that are very clearly laid out in these resources are things that become spiritually and emotionally abusive. And then again, that's evident in some of the stories people shared, which is why in that chapter you referenced earlier, Kelsey, one of our latter chapters in our books, we wanted to let people speak in their own words at length, kind of after we have kind of laid out the mythology and talked about all these things in detail, to kind of let some of these stories in length speak for themselves, because I think that's a powerful way to return agency to people, and also to say it's beyond our qualifications to parse out how that looks like, but listen to how this manifested in different ways. And then you can kind of see some of those threads more powerfully. I hope that speaks to that question a little bit.
Yeah. I think there are also some subtle things that people have said have caused them a lot of difficulty down the road. One of them is this persistent idea that like everything a child is doing can be placed into like worshiping God or idolatry. This idea that like everything a child is doing, you kind of as a parent are supposed to be watching and figuring out, are they in a Godward orientation or a sinward orientation, or however they want to say that. I think for a lot of people that sets them up for a lifetime of believing that everything I do, everything I consume, everything I think, everything I feel goes into this category of good or evil, right and wrong. And like I see this a lot now in some research that I'm doing about wellness in Christianity, people feeling like everything they put in their body can either be like God created, God ordained, or bad, of God or of man. There, like this real pull toward that kind of thinking in order to kind of purify oneself and optimize oneself and all these things. And I think for people who have a natural inclination towards scrupulosity or anxiety or even diagnoses like OCD, that just feeds those things in a really hard way. And people spend years, lifetimes unpacking that impulse to everything I'm doing. I need to be looking inward. And in some of these resources, you have the parent saddled with the responsibility of doing that on behalf of a child. So if you have a parent who is dealing with that, they're looking not only at everything they are doing as a parent and trying to decide this is good or bad, this is of God or of man. And also I'm doing this for my child. Is this good or bad? Is this of God or of man? That is just the most mentally exhausting way to live. Like that is the opposite of freedom. And I think that kind of fruit is really sad. It seems like a throwaway word, but it just makes me sad.
It's very sad. Yeah. And it normalizes and in some cases, I think cultivates that kind of scrupulosity, whether people are prone to it or not. It's just, this is the way to operate. And I also think of things like the instant obedience subculture like plays out for people where they reach adulthood and are like, I don't know my own desires or preferences. Like I don't have a sense of that. And that's a really painful, difficult thing to sort through. I've never been permitted to have feelings like anger or sadness or these certain feelings were never permitted. And so those are kind of fruits down the road that I think, it's interesting to think about how do you define something as abuse in the sense of, I will often have this conversation with people defending spanking because you're kind of, a lot of times people will come at the angle from intent, but I think that's less helpful. But because really it's measured by impact is where you kind of say, well, this is the impact it had though. And that is a really subjective and personal measure. So we can trace those things of like, here's this through line of like, it stripped away agency. It really left families bereft of understanding emotional depth and maturity. It left children bereft of discovering their own agency. These are things that are problematic and harmful, but whether that was experienced by someone as abuse or as a difficulty or as a challenge, or, that's probably going to vary in a number of ways. Similarly with spiritual catechesis, like we can identify like there are a lot of really problematic things, high control things, distorted theologies that landed like heavy yokes on people and were legalistic and were out of alignment with the life and teaching of Jesus. And so like, yeah, I think categorically we could say these are, if you're going to group them under spiritually healthy or spiritually abusive, we say these are spiritually abusive. But how someone experienced that, again, is going to be different, and it's going to include unique things about their context, unique things about their temperament, unique things about the delivery of different things. So it's a complicated question to answer. I would love, maybe in a future season, it would be great to get some mental health professionals with experience in that realm. Like I would love a Diane Langberg or someone like this who really has the experience to speak to this, to say, yeah, these are how those teachings track in these specific ways.
Yeah, I think so too. And I do hope that as people read the book, some of these questions are kind of answered just based on what these authors advocate for, what they're encouraging parents to think about their children and to try to do to their children. I think some of those things will become more evident. There's just a lot of evidence. A lot of these authors really spell things out for us in terms of answering some of these questions. Is this, at what point is this manipulation? Certainly abuse in some cases, yes.
Yeah. Well, and someone commented on a video I was doing recently, and there's a name for it, and I've already forgotten the name for it. But in that sense of like, where do you define the line? They were talking about like, how many pebbles do you remove from a pile of pebbles before it ceases to be a pile of pebbles? And it does feel like that. Like, how do you... I don't know how you end up defining those things, but to be like, yeah, there are really problematic things in these teaching that have led to physical, spiritual, and emotional abuse, psychological as well, like without question. But how that manifests is going to be different. And that doesn't necessarily mean it is every evangelical family had all of those things manifesting. So.
Right. And I think we try to treat that term with caution, abuse, because I think that our goal is not for parents to feel attacked here in our and the minute you start kind of we're seeming like we want to define abuse so we can call out people for being abusive, I think that will turn people away from work like this, because we just want people to read it and to consider these ideas, and we're not looking to attack or condemn parents.
I think, again, it lands to that desire for external categories that can feel so right coming out of these frameworks, when the reality, I think, is very messy and complicated. And yes, sometimes there are abusive people who intentionally are drawn to abusive systems and operate out of that. I think there's also a large category of people who are both victims and victimizers. And the generational cycles at play, particularly in parenting and family life, are not insignificant. They are significant. And so I think it can feel maybe good in a moment to, assign motivations and assign blame in sweeping terms. And I think that is very much more complicated than that, and is why we often will say these teachings betrayed everyone, because in significant ways they betrayed parents who then sometimes victimized their own children or abused or harmed their own children. And are left picking up the pieces of the horror they felt from that, the misplaced trust they had. And the children are left bearing the fallout of that and the shattered relationships from that. And it's cold comfort to say, well, your parent was betrayed by this, because they're still a child who experienced this. So it gets very messy and complicated, and I think requires the kind of empathy and multiplicity, being able to try and hold multiple things can be true at the same time, that is not practiced in evangelical communities to begin with. So it can be difficult for people trying to sift through this later to do it without falling into some of those same categories of like, oh, well, my parents used Dobson, so should I now be estranged from them? And you know what I mean? And or to look for those same sort of authoritative voices to tell them how to navigate sorting through this. And that can be just a really, I just want to name that, that's just a hard thing. Like, I don't think there is an easy path for that either. Often it's fits and starts, and it may mean making mistakes along the way of navigating what that looks like too, because I think there can be a tendency to react in that way and be like, well, I guess then this is the solution, rather than, as you mentioned earlier, just with parenting in general, there's an ongoing, constantly shifting approaches to different stages all the way through, I think, parenting adult children as well. That also requires seeing the people in front of you, the individual child, the individual parent in front of you. And so it's such a double betrayal, because it harmed so many people and left them bereft of the things that really are needed to begin to move forward too. So, whew.
Yeah, that's such a big question. And I really do think some of the like where we go from here stuff is we try to speak to that in the end of the book, in not a prescriptive way, but in a like, go and be free and do this, in your own discernment and in your your own sort of personal empowerment to make decisions about you and your family and your spiritual health and emotional health. There's not a lot in our book that is prescriptive for people who are really looking for like, and there are resources for that. You mentioned Diane Langenberg. There are people who are there for that. And there are resources and professionals who can help with that. But I guess we're sort of here to like a little bit do a little picking apart of these ideas and say like, you can just let this all go. you can leave these ideas behind you and walk forward and kind of choose your path. We have no path to give you. And I feel really good about that.
Yeah, we really want to return agency to people, because for both parents and children alike, that's a huge thing these resources did, was rob them of agency and rob them of connection that could have been theirs. And so I think to kind of carefully do that dance of like, hopefully us shining a spotlight in different ways will help you find touch points in your own story that will empower and equip you to reclaim some of that, to find your way forward in a way that suits where you're at right now in your family, that respects the people in your own family system for the individuals they are, and with the hope that these ideas can be displaced with goals for connection, if that's something that's a possibility for you.
Yeah. Hey, I think that might actually be like a hopeful note for us to
Did we land on a hopeful note with one?
I think that might be the first time in a very long time.
That's a good thing.
Every time we sign off, I think we're always laughing to ourselves like, there is just no silver lining to this resource. I'm so sorry to leave you with that. But I feel like this is a good place. I'm happy that we kind of can end our last official episode of the season on an uplifting note.
Yes, and we so appreciate each of you. One of the most delightful things about being on social media throughout this process has just been connecting with people, and many of you have been so generous sharing your experiences and your stories with us. your observations, so many thoughtful observations. And so appreciate each of you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. This is not the last you'll hear from us, but it's, I guess, the last official thing you'll hear from us. So thank you for joining us in the church library here. We have enjoyed being here with you weekly for the last couple of months, and we hope to see you again soon.
We are so glad you've joined us in the church library today. This is Marissa Franksbert
and Kelsey Kramer McGinnis. And if you liked what you heard here, we think you'll be interested in reading our forthcoming book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families.
You can pre-order it now wherever books are sold, and it'll be on shelves in October of 2025.